feels so good. Praise the Most High God every day with your whole heart desire.
History, one of Black History's podcasts, which is basically you are joining and listening to the voice of history. And for this podcast, we will be talking about household budgeting and credit. Very important to all of us, whether we live in America or outside of the country. Credit is a very fascinating and practical and important piece of our life. Basically, for the countries and people who operate using credit, it's fundamental. And for the most part of it, in our Black community, so many times us as Blacks are challenged by credit, hence preventing us from enjoying common necessities, whether it may be for home, a car, and also it increases our deficit and our expenses, because we're paying more for items that we could have actually reduced the cost of and end up keeping more of that cash for other things such as savings and investments and other items. Nonetheless, this evening I want to welcome, but is one of our teammates, and he's the expert on the matter of credit and finance in general. But for today, of course, the topic revolves around budgeting and credit. And he is no other than Mr. Jacob Vanderpuye, one of our African brothers who is well established. And I will turn it over. Mr. Jacob, welcome to the podcast. And I'm happy to have you today to speak to the general audience and our guests on the topic of budgeting. So, Mr. Vanderpuye, go ahead and tell us a little about you. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you, people. Thank you, Black History. This indeed is a pivotal moment in history as a people and the country in which we live today, the United States. So I'm happy to join Owen and team to spread the knowledge of finance to our people across the globe and this country and wherever you are. So first of all, just a little introduction. My name is Jay. In Ghana, emigrated to the United States, and I've been here for quite some time. I'll say a decade and a half or so. And I come to this subject with a lot of experience, 2 decades in the finance industry, from auditing to banking and finance to insurance and what have you. And of course, I practice what I'm about to talk about in my home. Today's subject is rightly building credit, a householding budget and building your credit. So I will pose the proverbial question: what is budgeting, or what is credit? Budgeting is just a tool until you breathe life into it, help you and the people who live within your household. Same applies for credit. Credit is a tool. And if you have the knowledge on credit, it will help you. If you do not have the knowledge on credit, unfortunately, in the society that we live in, and nobody might have told you, or your bankers might not have told you, but if you do not have the knowledge of credit, you're being penalized in society because you don't have that knowledge. So I hope that as I spend time with you and Owen this evening, we're able to expand the knowledge we have around credit and budgeting and how it can positively impact our lives in the society.
Mr. Jacob, I have a question for you. One of the number of questions I will pose to you, and importantly, why families need a budget, and what is the importance of having a budget in today's family? Could you elaborate on that for me?
Good question. Good, excellent question. And there are two ways of looking at this. First of all, from a therapeutic point of view, budgeting brings families together. What I believe it on that.
Definitely.
If you live in a household with your spouse and kids, and either both of you are engaged in some form of trade or job, and you have an income coming in the house, both you and a spouse need to sit and decide on how to apply the funds that come into your home. So I'll give an example. You live in a house where you have a mortgage. It's a 30-year mortgage. You have a whole lifetime to pay off this mortgage. You have vehicles, which has an auto loan, which will probably take, typically auto loans are shorter, maybe 5 years or 60 months to pay off. You might have credit cards, which don't necessarily have a time limit, but every month you have to make a payment. And then you have the usual utilities at home, your electric, your phone, internet lately, right? Childcare services, if you have kids, and then groceries. And for most households, I must say, the amount of funds which come in from the work that we do does not cover our entire monthly expense. And so there's always some kind of a deficit where we spend and still find ourselves scratching our heads trying to find money for the next, for the balance. I mean, what we haven't met. So you pay typically your mortgage, your auto loan, childcare services, and you're left with your healthcare bills, right? It happens to all households.
All of us.
When you use budget, I know, right? When you use the budget as a tool, what you're doing is to actually pen down these expenses that you have. And there's a power that you and I have called choice. Okay. When you pen down these expenses that you have, you then prioritize the expenses that you have based on, importance, the number of times, the importance, the agency of the bill, and a host of other things which might be personal to you. Because if you have X amount coming in and you can't cover everything, it makes sense that you cover the most important ones, right?
Right.
And so the budgeting tool, which is easy, you can get a budget. If you Google budgeting, you'll get the budget tool or budget sheet online. It's easy. It'll tell you what your receivables are, exactly what the expenses are. And then between your wife and yourself, you can decide to prioritize and pay what you don't need to pay and what you need to pay. Go ahead.
And I just wanted to kind of break in a little bit and say that was something I was thinking about. How easy is it to ask that? How easy can anyone basically formulate and put a budget irrespective of their income? And what are some of the tools that are available?
It is very easy. It is very easy. On the very basic level, you can sit and without even getting the budgeting tool online, if you Google budgeting tools or budget data online, you get a tool. But even without that, you can sit at home and we budget every month without knowing that we're budgeting. The problem is that because we don't do it formally, okay, we don't take advantage of the actual help. And then because we depend on our memory to do the budgeting, we lose out on a whole lot of things. So back to my point earlier, and if you sit with your spouse to do the budgeting, you would prioritize what bills you have to pay, because she might agree to some or he might agree to others which you would not, and then you come get a middle ground, right? And you decide to prioritize what to pay and what not to pay. However, those bills that you do not pay do not disappear into thin air. It'll come due at some point. Right. At the same time, as a family, you do have what we call short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So those goals that you have come into action when you're deciding which bills to pay or not to pay. And a typical example will be retirement, right? Savings for retirement and savings for an emergency, because an emergency will happen. It's just a matter of time. And so you sit thinking that no emergency will happen and you don't prepare for it. And when emergency happens, it'll wipe you out. So even though you don't have enough coming in, you still have to know that because you have to plan for an emergency, you need a portion of those funds hived away for that emergency. And so see, that comes into the budgeting process when you sit with your spouse to decide what to pay, what not to pay. There's a portion which goes to the emergency which you have to pay, and so therefore because you contribute towards emergency, you avoid certain bills which you can't do that month, right? So that's an example. So that's one way. That therapeutic session that you sit with your wife to discuss the budgeting process is what I call bringing both you and your family. Sometimes people have kids in their budgeting session, and by doing so, they understand the running of the household, and they understand the importance of not spending excessively. They understand the importance of not putting pressure on some things which will not help their household growth. Right. So that's a therapeutic session.
Right. So if
go ahead.
If I'm understanding you correctly, basically throughout our everyday activities in terms of what we earn, without even knowing, if you didn't analyze or formulate what we're talking about as budget, we eventually are basically, we do it irrespective of, because it's like basically it's the funds that you set aside for your travels, for your gas, for your food, without even putting it in any collective term, it is still, you are still making a budget.
You're perfectly right. You're budgeting whether you believe it or not. The purpose here is to get everybody to formalize the process so that we don't do what we call impulse buying. We don't do what we call impulse gifting, or doing things because we think we should do it at the moment and not taking the medium, long, and short term into consideration.
Right.
And if we do that as a lifestyle, we're going to be very efficient in our financial management.
So, in other words, budget also helps us to be able to stash some of our earnings away in the form of what we'll call, everybody knows, savings.
Yes.
Okay. So my next question to you is, how many times should a family consider looking at a budget or putting a budgeting exercise into play?
So good question. Budgeting should be a monthly affair. Okay, ideally, it should be a monthly affair, but it differs from family to family. Why do I say that? Some people earn weekly, others earn bi-weekly, others earn monthly. So we're assuming that most people get most of their funds monthly, and so therefore they meet once a month to allocate expenses and savings and do all their financial allocations once a month. However, if you're someone who earns weekly, then it behoves you to do this weekly until such a time that you think you have a hold of the expenditure process. Then you can then extend it to maybe bi-weekly or bi-monthly. But to answer your question directly, at least you need to sit once every month with your family to decide and discuss your financial management process, which includes your budgeting. For some people, guess what? Budgeting is a daily affair. Now, if you do budgeting on a daily basis, yes, it's tedious, but sometimes it's necessary. Why? Because you find yourself in a very tight financial grind. So I'll give you an example. You go to the bank to get a loan, you're unable to get a loan. You've exhausted all your savings. Family wouldn't help, right? Mm-hmm. You're a day laborer, for instance. And so you have what, 50, 60, or maybe even $30 coming in a day. Okay. You need to budget and understand that for this $30 or $40 which you're earning a day, how do you spread this $30? How do you stretch it the most so that you can spend and still save some on the day that you don't get your day job? All right. And so you have to do your budget daily, maybe mentally, or if you have a piece of paper, write it down. $30 coming in. How much does it cost to pay for a 3-square meal? You might say, well, it's probably maybe $6 or $7 to get a McDonald's meal. But considering that I have to save some money, I will skip my lunch and just eat breakfast and dinner. Matter of fact, sometimes it's so difficult that I'll skip lunch and dinner and just do breakfast. Why? Because that's all I can afford. Why? Because when I spend my $5 or $7 on my breakfast or brunch right? The remainder of the $23 which is left needs to stretch me to cover my transportation and any emergencies that I might have, or any problem that I might have, you know? And so you want to think about it in those terms. And then as time goes on, when you've saved enough, so let's say in this case, you end up saving maybe $3 or $5 a day, right? If you keep doing that, and the time comes when you have, by doing that, you're able to calculate that if I do this for say 20, 40, 50, or 60 more days, I'm able to come up with $1,000 to rent a spot. You know, so that's planning right there. But that's planning on a daily basis, which feeds into a monthly or bi-monthly target of getting your first rental.
And so budgeting, in a sense, in essence, helps you to accomplish your financial goals.
Yes.
So there's a product of budgeting that is a little bit painful to talk about, but they're intertwined, and that's the hard piece of credit. We oftentimes hear about credit, and we are sometimes deficient of good credit. It's not just credit, but credit has to be good. So let me ask you to define the credit from a professional standpoint and bring it down to the easy understanding for our listeners.
Excellent question. So this takes me back to business school. And I remember that in business school, we're taught that cash is king, you know? And then to my utter surprise,
nobody refuses cash.
Exactly. But to my utter surprise, when I actually started practicing my craft in the bank, I learned that credit is king.
Definitely.
Why is that?
Tell us why is that?
Exactly, right? To your academic definition of credit is when somebody lends you money, right, with a promise by you to pay on another day. And then there are terms which comes with the credit. Bottom line, credit is the confidence that a banking or financial institution will repose in you to pay them back funds that they lend you, right? They have confidence that when they lend you that money, you will pay them back. The issue is that how do you build that confidence, right, for yourself?
Right.
So that the financial institution will look at your level of confidence and say, you know, I'm confident in Jacob, I'm confident in Owen. And so because I'm so confident in him, I will lend him X amount of money and he or she will pay me back on this date. Now, flip it and think of it in terms of, say, your friends, okay? You do have friends. And so we practice credit without knowing that we practice credit. Amongst our friends, you know which friend you will lend a 20, 30 here without blinking. Why? Because over time, they have proven to you that when you lend them a 20 and 10 here and there, they always pay you back, and they pay you back on time. Right. Sometimes they pay you with interest. Now, the process of your mind coming up with who is credit worthy or not is similar to what happens in the banking institution. And we'll come to the details and how that unfolds and all of those things. But it's a scientific process which I'll break down and explain to you, so that if you understand how credit is built, it will be easy for you to practice and make sure that that credit helps you.
Okay, so with that said, we can look at credit as being responsible to honor an agreement with, whether it is someone, or in this case, we're looking at the financial institution, to be able to deliver on your agreement in a timely fashion that is set forth by whatever contractual agreement that may be. Because actually, at the end of the day, it's all a contract. But there's a key piece, there's a key element that I want to ask. We oftentimes, even as Blacks, we are able to build something, but there is a distinction between building it and maintaining it. So over time, we build a lot of things, or we put things into place, but we lack the skill of maintaining. So tell me, how would you advise our listeners to maintain credit that will be built over time when it is established?
So first of all, to maintain something, you have to build it. All right. To build credit, I equated building of credit to building of confidence. It's actually building of your financial management skills. That's what it is. That's why budgeting is important, because if you budget properly, you'll be able to pay your bills on time. When you pay these bills on time, the activity of paying the bills on time are reported to what we call the credit bureaus, right? We have the Equifax, we have the Experian, and the other name doesn't come to me, but there are quite a lot of Credit Karma and a host of other credit companies out there who collect these records. They collect your payment history. When a company collects your payment history, what they're doing is actually making a historical case of your ability and willingness to pay a bill. Your ability and willingness to pay a bill is a reflection of you honoring contracts that you execute or set up with companies. So, for instance, your utility bill, your phone bill, your auto bill, your mortgage. These bills, whether I believe it or not, are reported to the credit bureaus. Every month you pay, it is reported. The time you paid it, the amount you paid, and the amount that you owe. All of that is reported and recorded. And what the credit bureaus have what we call an algorithm, which puts together that payment history that you've created to come up with a number called the credit score. And that credit score, therefore, shows your payment behavior or your financial management skills. So to put it bluntly, the higher your credit score, right, the higher your propensity to pay a bill which you owe, or the higher the confidence that a bank has in you to execute a contract that they come into terms with you, right? So to answer your question simply, building credit involves you making sure that you yes, you owe money in the society that we live in, but you make those payments
timely payment
and in full.
Right.
That's how you build it.
Right.
Maintaining it is just continuing that behavior, right? And having different credit lines, because if you do not have any credit lines, there's nothing to report, and so therefore you can't maintain it.
Right.
So you have to have credit, which is why they say credit is king, because you have to have credit.
Right.
Another reason why they say credit is king is that when you have cash, it's a limited amount of money, right? You have cash of $1,000. That's it. When you have credit, credit is king, because when you have credit, you can borrow that $1,000, which is cash you have, guess what? And more. So you can borrow $10,000 if you have good credit. Right. But if all you have is cash, the cash that you have, which is $1,000, is limited, and that's all you have, which is why credit is king and cash is not a king. We always knew.
Right. So in other words, I could say cash is a definite quantity, which is basically very tangible and limited, but credit is almost an infinite supply based on your ability.
You got it, bro. You got it.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful.
You got it.
It beckons me to expound a little bit for you to give us a little bit of insight on what is the benefit and why should one build credit.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah. So this is the most important question of the night. What is the benefit of having credit? Right. Now, as you follow our conversation, we started from budgeting to the definition of credit to why I have credit and maintain credit. But now we come to the meat and potatoes. This is the real reason. So, and this is pivotal. It's pivotal in the sense that we are in Black History Month, and we all know, if you read our history, that we have not, as a people, been able to build wealth, build the wealth and bequeath this wealth into our progeny, our children. And because of that, our kids come to this world and start the cycle again, which we have started, did not finish, but because we didn't do it well, we didn't bequeath anything for them to build on. And so they start the process again, and as a people remain at the same place. When you compare it to other ethnicities or other nations or other people who have practiced the craft of maintaining credit and building wealth, you realize that they have been able to accumulate enormous amount of wealth in terms of property, cash, and other assets. And when they pass, they leave these properties to their kids, who then don't have to start from scratch but build on it. And so they become a better people. Now, to become a better people and to be able to build some kind of assets for our own children and our families, we need to understand credit and build wealth. If you build credit, you're able to build wealth. Why do I say that? If you are credit worthy, you are able to go to the bank and borrow $1 million or $500,000 to buy a property. What is property? A property is an asset. Property is an asset which increases in value over time. And so therefore,
so we're talking about real estate.
Yes. If you borrow $1 million to buy a house in which to live in with your children, okay, and you have a contract to pay back in 30 years. In 30 years' time, after living in that place, that property with your kids, you would have paid off that $1 million property, right? And you're now old and you're retired, and so let's say you have 20 or 30 more years to live, so you have a place to put your head. But the most important thing is that in 30 years' time, when you've paid off that $1 million property, the value of that $1 million property in 30 years' time would have doubled or tripled. So that property which you bought for $1 million in 30 years will be worth $3 or $4 million.
So
now this is where the wealth comes in.
Right.
You have labored to pay for $1 million, and you have value of $4 billion, which when you pass, you can give to your kids so that they don't start from borrowing like you did, but they start from having some assets to be able to borrow more. And that's the wealth creation process. Right.
So in other words, I'm gonna get a little bit previous here by saying and looking at the property now being an asset, but there's a crucial element to asset, as one can look at investing in assets that are depreciating assets, because I know a lot of us as blacks, we like as black folks, since we like the flashy cars and we like the things that really looks good and make us feel good. However, there is a difference to investing and actually acquiring wealth. By be careful of investing into the depreciating assets versus assets that increase, as in real property, as in real estate. Give us a little tidbit about that.
Good question. So there are two ways to approach this question, right? Yes, we all know that assets like cars and clothing and other other perishable things, food and things, they expire, right? Over time, they get out of vogue, or they look newer versions come. Say somebody has an iPhone 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now we have iPhone 11, right? You pay $1,000 to buy iPhone 11. It works as well as your iPhone 6 or 7, right? But you spend a huge amount of money to do that. You look at it from two ways. First of all, having an iPhone 7 and having the latest model of car makes you happy. Now, happiness is a premium. And you want that peace of mind to say, you know what, when I'm happy, my family's happy, I'm able to work harder because I'm happy, right? So you got to balance it out and say, to what extent would you satisfy your happiness premium and leave enough to invest for the future and create a balance, because you still want to be happy, right? So whilst I do not want to bash the people who spend a fortune on flashy cars and rims and other bags and phones and other things which depreciate over time, they have to understand going into the game that what they're purchasing, right, reduces in value over time. Now, if you know that what you're going to spend your money on reduces in value over time, but before you spend it, you decide that yes, you don't mind putting money in this space for it to reduce in value. At the same time, you also have knowledge on how to spend on things which increase in value over time, like having a house, buying a business, okay, invest in education. All of these things, when you invest there, increases in value over time. So depreciation is simply reducing in value over time. Appreciation, which is the opposite, increases in value over time. So we have something called the power of choice. It's a very powerful tool.
Right.
And by exercising the power of choice, we then can use the budgeting process, which I spoke about earlier on, to make a decision as to what to spend on depreciable assets and what to spend on appreciable assets. The choice is ours. Exercise that power of choice wisely, because at the end of the day, the proverbial saying is that the cock will come home to roost, right? And so therefore a time will come when your judgment of your financial judgment and financial management will come to question, and then somebody will sit and judge you for all those decisions that you take. All I'm saying is that equip yourself with the knowledge, and so that when you exercise your power of choice, you do it in such a manner that come doomsday, you can be held accountable, and you can account for your stewardship of all the things that you've been rewarded for in this and on this earth.
Right. So I will want to make an appeal in using an analogy to say, it is almost to say that we are going to get old, and in our old age our bodies depreciate, but we can mitigate our depreciating bodies by eating right. So when we get to that age, what we have done with what we have put into our bodies will now come back to benefit us, where we can now rely on safely from the investment in the choice of food that we have placed into our bodies to take us further and extend our health, which contributes to the health and healthy lifestyle. So
perfect analogy. Perfect.
Right.
Couldn't have said better.
Couldn't have said better. Well, so it brings me to the final question, which is, I am thinking, I am not able to pass on my good health or my good genes to my child after he or she is born. But in a practical sense, is it possible that if I build and create good credit, and since who is coming behind is my offspring, can I inadvertently pass that good credit on to my offspring? Is there such a thing? Is it possible?
Excellent question. And a tool which a lot of people use, but we don't. The simple answer to your question is that yes, you can. The question is, how do you do it? I'll give you an example. I lead by example, and so being an expert in the credit and budgeting space, I decided to lead by example by making sure that my spouse does the same. And at the time, some a decade ago, my spouse didn't have credit, and so what I did was that I partnered my spouse to my credit card. So I have a credit card, and my credit card had my payment history and everything was excellent on the credit card. I called my credit card company and said I wanted to make it a joint credit card, so that credit card, which had a limit of say $20,000, I joined my wife on there, and automatically she assumed my credit.
Oh wow! Say that. Explain that again one more time so the listeners can really get a hold of what we are saying. That credit is in fact transferable if you can actually, either one in the household can set the pace. You can also bring the other family members along with you if it is done correctly.
Yes. So you can add your spouse or your kids to your credit, in the sense that you don't go to the credit bureau to add them now. You just help them build their credit faster. So if you have good credit, you partner your spouse or whoever is in your household who you want to pass the credit on to your credit. What it does is that when you partner them to your credit, and in the process, the downside of that is that if in the process of you using that credit card, your wife does not display excellent financial attitude, and your wife spends that credit card and doesn't pay on time, it reflects on you because it drops your credit, right? If they execute a certain